2020, Labor's Day. And today we are taking the subject on gender-based violence, which is against women and girls. It's also a global pandemic that affects 1 in 3 women in their lifetime. The numbers are very staggering. 35% of women worldwide have experienced either physical and or sexual intimate partner violence or non-partner sexual violence. This issue is not only devastating for survivors of violence and their families, but also entails significant social and economic cost. One characteristic of this gender-based violence is that it knows no social or economic boundaries and affects women and girls of all socio-economic backgrounds. This issue needs to be addressed in both developing and developed countries. So in this, taking in this context and the during the COVID, it's not because of COVID disease, it's because of the lockdown, which is a preventive methodology for the COVID. We are seeing in the newspapers and the news channels daily, some or other on the gender-based violence. Today, we have 2 experts who have been studying this gender-based violence since 20 to 30 years. We have Anuja Gulati, who is working as a consultant with UNFPA, and Madam Ujjwala Hemant Kedrekar, who is also instrumental in making Act of the Domestic Violence. So, Madam, welcome to the Indian Nursing Council panel. Now, I request Dr. Anuja Gulati to tell us more about gender-based violence and how our nurses can help the victims to come out of the psychosocial and other issues faced during the violence. Over to Madam.
Thank you so much, Bharti-ji. Good morning, everyone. I hope all of you and your loved ones are safe and in good health. Bharti-ji, can I request you to please put on the slides?
Yes, ma'am.
While the slides are coming on, I would just like to say that every individual, we all know, has the right to dignity, optimal growth, and a life free of violence and discrimination. In spite of this, violence against women continues unabated in our society. Violence against women is a manifestation of historically unequal power relations between men and women, which has led to discrimination against and domination over women by men. Violence actually denies women the right to survival, well-being, and development. Yet the fact is that most violence occurs within the home and in the most intimate and trusted relationships, because of which women often hide it and continue to suffer in silence. But violence is a very critical public health issue because it is a major cause of death and disability amongst women, and it adversely impacts their physical, mental, sexual, and reproductive health. And because of this, nurses have a very, very important role to play in addressing the issue of violence in women's life and in providing support, care, treatment, and referral. Can we have the next slide, please? Before we go on, what is violence, or how do we define violence? Against women is any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or psychological harm or suffering to women, including the threats of such acts, coercion or arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether it occurs in public or private life. Can I have the next slide, please? We have seen that whenever there is a humanitarian crisis, whether it is, an earthquake, Bharti-ji, can I have the next slide, please? We've seen that whenever there is a humanitarian crisis, whether it's an earthquake or it's, devastating floods or epidemics, there has been a surge in violence, and COVID is really no exception. There have been several reports of an increase in violence against women and girls after the lockdown was put in place, and that's probably because women are constrained within their house, within abusive relationships with abusive partners and relatives inside a house. Uh, the National Commission for Women actually said that there's been an increase in the number of people calling uh, to seek support for domestic violence on their helpline. On the other hand, there are several NGOs that have also said that the number of calls have come down, or the calls are coming and then they get dropped. This is probably because women are desperate to seek help, but probably because the abuser is very close to them, they are not able to speak. So why is it that there's a surge in violence during humanitarian context, or specifically during this time? One is because, like we said, a woman is constrained within the house. Caregiving responsibilities as a result of the lockdown, whether it is care of children who are at home, schools having closed down, that has gone up tremendously. Also, the household chores and the pressure on women has gone up tremendously. The demands from women have gone up tremendously. There's financial stress because of compromised access of women to jobs and livelihoods. And we know that a very large percentage of people working in the unorganized sector are women, and they are the first ones who have lost their jobs. Also, intimate partner violence at home. Like I said, the woman could be at home with an abusive partner, and also because women have no autonomy over their sexual lives, which could lead to increase in intimate partner violence. Also, there have been large scale displacement of migrant workers, including women. And when they go back to their villages, there's a lot of discrimination and violence, and we hear small reports of it, whether it's on the basis of religion, caste, age, etc. We've got a few reports of violence against women in these temporary migrant centers that have been set up. And just a little before we started, we were discussing internally, and Dr. Dilip mentioned that a lot of the nursing staff, and not just the nursing staff, across the board, all health have been facing verbal abuse at the hands of families of patients, probably because they are overwhelmed, probably because they don't know how to respond to a situation like this. I mean, the families, and in their frustration, it's verbal abuse of the health professionals. And along with this, the entire protection systems are or have become inaccessible because of the lockdown. Can I have the next slide, please? Bharti ji just mentioned that, 1 in 3 women is facing violence. What are the health consequences of violence? Violence has both fatal and non-fatal consequences. The non-fatal consequences could be physical, they could be psychological or emotional, and sexual or reproductive. Physical could be in the form of bruises, fractures, cuts, strangulation, wounds, stab wounds, etc. Psychological consequences could be increased anxiety, depression, phobia. Women could have suicidal tendencies, and they could also indulge in substance abuse. Sexual or reproductive consequences are in the nature of gynecological disorders. Pregnant women are at a risk of being beaten much more, and places targeting the womb, the genitals, the breasts, etc. So, there's an increased risk of violence in pregnancy, and because of increased risk in violence, miscarriages. And fatal consequences because of all these suicides, etc. The next slide, please. So, like we said, there are severe consequences of violence and health consequences of violence. The WHO recently said that women exposed to intimate partner violence are twice as likely to experience depression. 16% of them are more likely to have a low birth weight baby. 42% of them who have experienced violence have had injuries as a result of the violence by the intimate partner. and an overwhelming 38% of all murders of women and girls are reported to have been committed by an intimate partner. The next slide, please. Why is it that health institutions are an important point, or what?
Yes, aa raha hai.
I'm sorry. Yes, we can see it. Why are health institutions an important institution, and what is the critical role of the health sector, especially nurses, in dealing with violence? See, health institutions are a very, very important entry point for women facing violence. You know, a woman can go into a health facility without any stigma. She could just go there, you know, with any symptoms. So it is the first, also generally the first contact point for a woman facing violence. And health providers are very strategically placed to identify women survivors of violence. I mean, women who come in with presenting symptoms, women who come with bruises, etc. So they can identify a woman who is coming and try to ask questions, try to probe, uh, and provide the required services. Can we have the next slide, please? So the next slide, I have tried to capture what is a comprehensive health sector response to women facing violence. One is very important to identify women survivors. And as we go along, we will deal with each of these. The second, once a survivor is identified, what kind of care and treatment can be provided? I've divided this into three. First is the first line support, immediate care, treatment, ensuring the woman of confidentiality, seeking history, collection of a basic thing. The second is, if it is a survivor of sexual assault or rape, then what is it that the health system can do? The health system has a very, very critical role here in seeking consent, taking history, providing treatment, collection of evidence, preserving the chain of evidence, and providing comprehensive care. The third part is, when we talk of care and treatment, it's not just physical care and treatment, but it has to include a very, very strong component of psychosocial support to the woman, counseling, helping her deal with her symptoms of stress. There could be post-traumatic stress disorders, anxieties, depressions. So that and counseling is a very, very critical part. The third important part that any health professionals and nurses can be involved in is documentation. Documentation is very, very important if, we need to get justice to the survivors. In case of domestic violence, it is the domestic incident report. In cases of sexual assault, it is the medical legal report. And the fourth important issue is linkages and referral. If a woman survivor requires to be referred to a higher facility, or she requires to be referred to police to file an FIR, depending on her needs, it may be a referral to a shelter home. In case of children, it may be referral to the child welfare committee. So what are the referral and linkages that need to be established? Can we have the next slide, please? Bharti ji? So how is it that the nurses can respond to survivors? Like I said, first is you can help to identify survivors of violence and provide the first line support. These are two very critical things that nursing staff can do immediately when they feel that a woman survivor of violence has approached a health facility. Then they can assist doctors for medical examination in cases of sexual violence. They can also help in collection of evidence, undertaking documentation, and then very, very important, the nurses can provide immediate psychosocial support or link the survivor to psychosocial counseling and see what are the referral pathways? Where is it that women survivors can actually be referred to for the different needs that they are facing? Bharti ji, the next slide, please. I just thought I will have a couple of case studies here to help drive home the fact that how is it that women survivors of violence really present to a health facility. So for the last 2 months, a 24-year-old Manju has been coming to the CHC every 2 to 3 days with complaints of weakness. She says she feels very fatigued. She's not interested in doing any work. Uska man bilkul nahi lag raha hai kisi kaam mein. The health professionals at the CHC examine her. They give her vitamins, they give her a tonic, they say you come back later. She keeps coming every 2 to 3 months. The providers actually feel, why is this woman coming every 2 to 3 months? But they counsel her and they send her back. A month later, she is brought to the CHC in an unconscious state with her wrist slit. Her husband is with her just by her and does not want to leave her. Another case is a case of a 16-year-old girl who's been married for just 2 months. She approaches the district hospital with complaints of severe stomachache for acidity. She comes back 1 month later and she has the same complaints, but she has several bruises on her forehead, on her arms, etc. She's again examined, given some painkillers. She's given again medicines for acidity. A few months later, she is brought to the hospital wrapped in a sheet with severe burns on her body. The next slide, please. So how is it that we as nurses can identify survivors of violence? The red flags, the moment we see these, we need to suspect that it's a case of violence and try to probe and ask discreet questions. These red flags are a woman who comes with multiple injuries at sites and she tries to usually cover them by clothing. Also, it's generally seen that when a woman who has faced violence or a survivor is brought to the hospital, her partner or her relatives are always with her. They do not want to leave her because they want to hear, they want to monitor what she is speaking. Another red flag could be a woman with strangulation signs on the neck, fractures to the arms. Another could be a very anxious woman who does not want to provide any information about how she was injured. She's scared that if she provides information, probably she will face more violence. Also, a woman with psychiatric problems such as depression, substance abuse, suicide attempts, etc. Can we have the next one? A woman with repeated histories of accidents. I already mentioned a pregnant woman where there are injuries to the breasts, the genitalia, or the abdomen. Why this? Because generally it is perceived that women who are pregnant, women who have had hysterectomies, have lost their reproductive values, and incidents of violence against such women can go up. A woman who tries to conceal the identity of the perpetrator. You may be trying to ask how this has happened. How is there a cut in your genitals? She will say, oh, I fell down, there was a drum blow, I hurt myself. But she will not say that there was, she's faced violence. Women who may be brought in semi-conscious or unconscious conditions. Again, such women generally tend to get discharged against medical advice. Generally, you see that there is a delay between the injury and coming to seek health services. And most often, such women are brought, in the later part of the day. It's, late nights, etc. Can we have the next slide, please? So what are the critical principles that nurses should look at when providing care? Once you find out there is a red flag, you see that there is a woman survivor of violence, yes, you need to ask, probe, and we will go to those questions. But before that, what are the principles that need to be followed for providing care to a woman survivor of violence? Survivor should be made aware of her rights. The first thing, her right to emotional, physical, and sexual health, her right to a life free of violence. Hmm? She should be provided services in a sensitive manner. Whenever you're giving service, you're trying to talk to her, take history. Please do not justify the violence. Do not say, oh, you did this, you added more salt to food, you've been doing this over a period of so many days. You do deserve violence. No, do not justify the violence in a woman's life. In fact, you need to reinforce the fact that every woman has a right to a life free of violence, and that the violence that is occurring against her, with her, is not her fault. You need to provide culturally and age appropriate services. You may be trying to talk to a woman in English, she may not even understand that language. So based on the survivor's social, cultural, and linguistic needs, you need to provide services. Children have to be provided services in a different way. Also, our entire approach should be survivor centric. We need to empower the survivor. Ask her what her needs and wishes are. Tell her you need to be treated. We need to collect evidence. We need to, preserve evidence if it's a case of sexual violence. And this is going to be the procedure. If she says yes, go ahead, only then we need to go ahead. Otherwise, if she says I am not going to give consent for X and Z, please only do Y, you need to do only that. So it needs to be a survivor centered approach. uh, Again, we need to treat the woman with dignity and respect. Tell her that she has a right to bodily autonomy and integrity, dignity. So those are very, very critical things. Also, every discussion with the woman should be confidential. While you maintain confidentiality, also explain to the woman the limits of confidentiality, because in cases of sexual violence there is mandatory police reporting, and police has to be informed. So inform her about that. She also needs to have access to all information. If you're collecting some information, if you're putting it down on reports, if you're doing some tests, she needs to have access to all of this. Can we have the next slide, please, Bharti ji? How is it that we can identify women survivors? There are two ways of identifying women survivors. One is through universal screening, that is, we screen every woman, or the other is through identifying clinical conditions. In a case like India, where the burden is very, very high, WHO does not recommend universal screening. They, in fact, say that you look at the clinical conditions, and based on clinical conditions, you identify women survivors. So what are the clinical conditions? They are very similar to the red flags that we said: symptoms of depression, anxiety, sleep disorders, tendencies for committing suicide or self-harm, abuse of substances, unexplained gastronomical symptoms, reproductive symptoms including severe pelvic pain, sexual dysfunctions, etc. The next slide also has, please, Bharti ji, the next slide. So these are critical symptoms based on which a woman survivor of violence can be identified. It could be chronic pain, which is unexplained, repeatedly coming to the health system with complaints of acidity, repeated accidents, etc. So based on clinical conditions, you need to identify a survivor of violence. The next slide, please, Bharti ji. What are the principles for asking about violence? Again, they are very similar to the principles of providing care. Ensure complete confidentiality, probe with sensitivity. Do not talk to a survivor of violence unless she is alone. Use a private space. Be empathetic and be absolutely non-judgmental. Use language that a woman understands, and tell the survivor repeatedly, validate what she's saying, and tell her repeatedly that she will not be endangered if she talks to you. Also, it's not that, yes, what is happening? We don't wait. We need to give the survivor sufficient time and space to open up, to talk, to trust you as a provider, and open up and speak. The next slide, please, Bharti ji. Here I will tell you that before we ask questions to a survivor on violence, how is it that we can probe? You could just probe by asking women, if you suspect violence, that many women experience problems with their husbands or partners or people they live with. Do you face any such problem? or probe like violence is a common feature in the lives of many women. Hence, I would like to ask you some questions about the same. And once this is done, then you could, next slide please, you could ask her discrete questions. uh, and what are these discrete questions? You could ask her questions like, has your husband or partner or somebody at home threatened to harm you physically? Has it happened in the recent past? Does someone be very sarcastic with you at home? Do they bully you all the time? Do they try to control you? You know, they do not give you access to basic essentials, maybe food, money to buy your basic essentials like sanitary napkins, etc. So these are kind of questions, discrete questions, that can be asked to a woman survivor of violence. The next slide please. If the survivor acknowledges violence, then you go ahead and provide first line of support. If the survivor does not acknowledge violence and you still feel that the survivor has faced violence, do not pressurize her. Give her time to decide if she wants to share, how much she wants to share. You can tell her that these are all the services that are available, and the survivor can come back at a later time or date and provide information on the effects of violence on the health of women and the health of her children. And you can definitely try and fix a follow-up date in case you feel that, this time she is not talking, but probably next time she will reveal the violence to you. The next slide, please. Having identified the survivor, what is it that you should do to provide first line support and immediate medical care? Listen to her with empathy. Identify her needs and concerns. She could have a range of needs. It could be emotional needs. She may have a need to, be linked to psychosocial support. So link her there. Link her to counselors. She may have a physical need. There may be injuries that need to be treated. There may be a wound that needs to be treated. She may not be immunized. You may need to give her a tetanus injection. So those things. She may have social needs. I don't want to stay here. I want to go back to my parents. So how is it that, that can be ensured? She may have other practical needs like her safety, the safety of her children. She may want to get out of the house, refer her to a shelter home, or depending on needs, you need to respond. The third is always validate what a survivor is saying, so that you are reassured that you and the survivor are on the same page. And when you're validating, please do not blame the survivor. Do not be judgmental. Tell her that, we can discuss a safety plan for you. Try and see understand the patterns of violence that you're facing. And when you see those patterns emerging, withdraw from those situations. Or if a safety plan has to be developed, tell her, keep your important documents like your ration card, your Aadhaar card, other documents like your education certificates with you. In case you have to leave home in an emergency, carry all this, keep some money with you. Also connect her to whatever kind of support services she requires and provide her with immediate care and treatment. This will, be based on her giving consent. Anything done without the consent of a woman is illegal if she has not given the consent. So take her consent, take her history, and provide her with medical care and treatment as required. The next slide, please. Then we come to the issue of, survivors of sexual assault or rape. I am not going to go into the details of this, but I would just like to mention that it's very important that we all know about it. This is entirely a session in itself. What is it that we need to do if a survivor of rape comes? And your role as nurses would be to assist the doctors. Here again, the issue is about seeking informed consent. Like I said, anything done without informed consent, as per section 164 A7 of CRPC, is illegal. Seek her informed consent for various steps that are listed here. Once she has given her consent, take complete history, because it's a case of sexual violence. So you need to take her medical history, surgical history, menstrual history, vaccination history, history of when violence happened, where did it happen, date, time, all that has to be recorded as part of history. Then we need to do medical examination of the survivor, and medical examination again, and collection of evidence will go together, and you will collect bodily evidence. Again, like I said, here you need to assist. So I'm just going very fast on this. Collect genital and anal evidence, and samples for the hospital lab, the clothes that were worn at the time of the assault, etc. And immediately after that, after evidence is collected, evidence has to be maintained. All evidence has to be sealed and maintained safely and securely before it is handed over to the forensic lab. So that is an important thing that nurses have to do. Ensure the security of collected evidence, undertake medico-legal documentation, provide medical care and treatment depending on what the woman has appeared with. If she has come within 4 to 5 days, you could probably look at providing her emergency contraception. If she's come within 72 hours and it was penetrative sex, the assault was penetrative, then you could look at providing her with HIV, PEP within 72 hours. Otherwise, if she's not immunized, she may need a tetanus. So depending on the history, complete medical care and treatment has to be provided, and you have to provide psychosocial support. Counsel her, refer her to counseling centers, refer her for rehabilitation, follow-up and care. Bharti ji, the next slide, please. Well, you can see that very recently, a few years back, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India, brought out complete guidelines and protocols for providing care to women survivors of sexual assault. They are very, very gender nuanced. How are they gender nuanced? Couple of things I've listed here. They say that all cases of sexual violence or assaults do not leave injuries. Injuries will be present depending on, what was the condition of the survivor at the time of the assault, whether she was intoxicated, drugged, etc. Because if that was the case, there will be no injuries. Also, absence of injuries could be because mucosal injuries heal very fast. And in fact, there's a study of WHO retrospective, there are genital injuries only in about 30% of the cases. Secondly, the protocols say that medical evidence may not be present in all cases. It will be present depending on several issues. What is the time lapse between the assault and the survivor reporting to the hospital? If it is 3 days, 4 days, evidence is lost. Also, it will depend on the activities that the survivor has undertaken after the assault. Has she washed? Has she bathed? Has she doused? Has she passed urine? If all this has happened, there is all chance of evidence being lost. Also, what was the nature of the assault? Was it penetrative? Then, and what kind of penetration? Whether it was peno-vaginal, whether it was peno-anal, peno-oral, or was it inserting objects or fingering? And now in the broadened definition of rape, all this constitutes sexual assault. The guidelines also very clearly say that there is no need to comment on the past sexual history of a woman. And hence, comments on the hymen, the status of the hymen, are insignificant, because hymen may not tear after sexual violence, or conversely, it may have torn because of rigorous physical activity, even without violence. So there is no need to comment on the hymen. Also, there is no need to do the two-finger test to assess the elasticity of the orifices, because it really has no bearing on the present incident of violence. Also, this particular guideline talks of comprehensive care. It says you need to provide complete care, starting from taking consent, history, treatment for infection, pain, pregnancy prophylaxis, PEP, injuries, psychological support, and linking to legal services. The next slide, please. I will just finish in 2 minutes. Once all this is done, a woman has to be connected for psychosocial support. You need to explain to a woman that she's likely to feel better with time, help to strengthen her positive coping mechanisms by building on her strengths. She may have forgotten her strengths. You need to tell her, oh, you have such a good educational degree, you can go out and work. You have such strong support systems in the form of your family, your friends, etc. Build on those strengths. Help her to explore them. If she's not able to think of it, keep asking, trying to talk to her in a nice and empathetic manner. She will come out with what her strengths are. Teach her a few exercises that will help to de-stress her, maybe breathing exercises. Tell her to, concentrate on certain things. If you feel she has self-harm or suicidal tendencies, you need to deal with them appropriately. Immediately refer her for care to somebody whom she can seek care from. Make follow-up appointments to provide her with further support, and also ensure that she has regular access to counseling, even to deal with post-traumatic stress disorder. The next slide, please, Bharti ji. The next slide, please. Yeah, so like I said, it's very, very important to undertake documentation and detailed documentation, because medical records are very important in the court of law. In case of domestic violence, it's the domestic incident report that you need to fill or assist the doctor in filling and forward it to the protection officer. And in cases of sexual violence or sexual assault, you need to complete the complete medical legal documentation. One more slide. Then once this is done, whatever support she needs, and I have talked several times, whether it is to the police for FIR, you need to refer there. If it is referral to child welfare committee, if it's a child, then refer her there to one-stop crisis centers, shelter homes, etc., based on whatever the need of the woman is, or for free legal aid to the Legal Services Authority. And if she needs care more, then to higher level facilities. Like we said, you yourself may be facing verbal abuse. My request to you is, these are trying times. We really, really appreciate the work that all you nurses are doing, how you're responding in this very difficult time and time of crisis. Be patient and calm. If you're facing verbal abuse, remove yourself from the situation and immediately bring the abuse to the notice of your supervisors. I think we will skip the next slide and go to the last slide. And I will just leave it here. This is just trying to sum up the entire presentation, that whenever you have people coming to you, you suspect, try and identify by talking to them if they are survivors of violence. Make a note on the case paper if you suspect violence. Ensure clients of confidentiality and privacy, explaining the limits of confidentiality. You may have to go in for mandatory police reporting in cases of sexual violence. Establish trust. Do not blame the client. Do not be judgmental. Only then will that be possible. Respect the client's autonomy in deciding what has to be done. Encourage the client to open up and talk. Ask discreet questions. The next slide, please. Yeah. Undertake complete medical examination, and this is most particular in cases of sexual violence. Refer the client for counseling. Undertake documentation as required, and provide referral and linkages as the need may be. And like I said, if it is a case of sexual violence, file a medico-legal case. Thank you so much. We will take questions later. I think over to Ujjwala now.
Thank you so much. It was a very nice presentation, an excellent presentation. I think our nurses have a lot of takeaway messages from you. Now over to Madam Ujjwala Khadrekar. Now, Madam, you will be able to give more lights on the legality of this violence. Yeah. So over to you, Madam.
Thank you, Bharti ji. Yeah. Welcome, friends. Yeah, so basically I am going to speak about the legal aspects which we all really need to know. Thank you, Anuja, for that wonderful presentation, and taking over from Anuja, She has built a very gender neutral concept for all of us. She has also made us understand, that women are facing violence, and let us all be on the same page. The acceptance is most essential, that it is just not during this pandemic time that women are facing violence, but globally, if we say that violence per se amongst women and children is a global phenomenon. And how as nursing staff can we address this issue? In the last few years, the Domestic Violence Act is in place since 2005, and we have, first time the law has come in place, which has actually given some legal mandate to the medical fraternity, to the medical staff, to the medical facilities. And we will see how when it is just not about providing psychosocial support to the women, but alongside you also have a legal mandate which you have to follow, and what it is that we are going to see today. First and foremost, to begin my session, Anuja has rightly pointed out that basically let us first understand we as citizens of India, not men or women, but we are all equal before law. And one of our fundamental right is right to equality. We really need to understand when women come to us in certain circumstances, are we really seeing women facing violence are really have equal footing when it comes to domestic violence or sexual violence? That we have to see. What are the fundamental right of a woman is violated when she's when she's facing violence? First and foremost, we really need to understand right to equality is something that is violated. Secondly, discrimination on the ground of sex and also opportunities that has been given to her at home or in public front. That we really need to understand. Thirdly, what we really need to understand is all the state governments have been given powers, have been given, basically all the state government has to really work towards uplifting the women and children of their respective states, and of course nationally. Fourthly, most important, Article 21, which provides, and it is just not about women, but even men. It says, right to live with freedom and liberty and dignity. Now, we really have to see the women coming to us for whatever reasons. My experience, even Anuja's experience, have been working very closely with hospitals. We have been working in the hospitals when we were developing these protocols. And what we saw, my experience, especially in the OPDs, I felt that in the OPDs, especially the gynec OPDs, the FMW wards that I worked with, I saw that most women in this coming to gynec OPD or even orthopedic OPD for that matter, or even in the female ward, I have seen most women are potential. They're not potential, but they are definitely cases of domestic violence. What I have seen is we are providing treatment to them when they come to. So it is just a superficial treatment that but we are basically not reaching out to them, which is most important. What we are going to see today is understanding why this law has come in place. Have you, I'm sure this PWGVA, what is this? It is Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, which came way back in 2005. The rules were framed in 2006. The law came to be implemented only in 2006. Please, all the participants present today, let us understand why this law has at all come to place and how you as a first line worker can really provide this kind of assistance to women who are coming to you. Let us see what the Act says. The Act first and foremost says that every woman and girl has right to live in a home free from violence. Most important. She has a right to live in a shared household. We will see what is the shared household. Shared household is a place where she is presently living or even otherwise lived. That is shared household. It may be her maternal home, it may be her matrimonial home. Okay? And her right to seek immediate remedies. So these are some of the unambiguous recognition which the law has given to the woman. Every woman, so it says that zero tolerance to violence. No woman should be facing violence. Secondly, we have to say that she has right to live in the shared household. This law has recognized, mind you, the women again who are coming to us, they are pregnant, they are facing violence, they are coming with bruises, they are coming with psychiatric problems, they are coming with psychosomatic problems. All this we really need to understand. we are not concerned that the women who are coming to us, either they are in a relationship of marital context or non-marital context. Okay, this law also protects women. There is some voice in the background. Can I continue? Natiji, can I continue? Okay. Okay. Can I continue?
Please continue. Please continue.
Yeah. Can I have the previous slide, please?
This one?
Previous slide.
Yeah.
So the law is just not protecting the married woman, but it protects women in relationship, even in the nature of marriage. It protects women both in marital and non-marital context. Okay, it is also protecting women who are facing violence in bigamous marriages or fraudulent marriages, or just as live-in partners. This law is not giving a judgment on the morality of cohabitation, and it is not saying that any second marriage is recognized under the law. This law is specifically intended to protect women and children. Okay, so it includes mother, daughters, sisters, widows, and even relations through adoption. So these are some of the, we will continue. Can I have the next slide, please? Can I have the next slide? Yeah. Our experience while dealing with cases of violence, survivor of violence, most women, even in the hospitals, your experience has also been the same. You know, women are not reporting that they are being violated or being abused by their husbands or anybody, any family member. They may come to you and they may tell you that she had a fall. She fell in the bathroom or she fell somewhere in the corridor. But she may not. But I think we are experts. We as medical professionals, we are being trained to identify. This is what even Anuja brought out in her presentation. We are trained to identify the abuse that we face, which is most important. The abuse, whether it is induced or it is spontaneous, is something that you are trained to identify. And please, this is one point that you have to really probe into. This law says any woman who is coming to us may not be even reporting to you that her husband has beaten her or somebody in the family has beaten her, but so because she doesn't want her husband to be put behind bars or do not want to make any police complaint. Please understand, this law is both a mixture of civil and criminal law. The woman, if she is reporting domestic violence, she will get civil relief without the arrest of the husband. But in case if any order that is been breached, then only criminal action will be taken against the husband. So it is a mixture of civil and criminal law. A woman has access to justice, and how she can access justice is through protection officers. We will see who are these protection officers being appointed by the state government and also the notified service providers. The other mechanism that is in place to really assist the woman to seek justice is the medical facility, the shelter homes, the legal aid, and of course the magistrates. A woman gets justice under one single window clearance. Okay, so she will get all form of relief just going to one court and other than going to multiple courts. Can I have the next slide? Next slide, please. Yeah. Now what Anuja basically, no, the previous slide, please. please understand what is domestic violence, which is very important. First time, it has taken us a century to even define domestic violence. Our basic, I think the first impression that we have about domestic violence cases is that domestic violence is physical violence. But the law recognized, because we know, Anuja just talked about the fatal and the non-fatal consequences. And there we saw the kind of impact a violence can have on the woman, both the physical and the mental health of the woman. So let us understand what is domestic violence and how the law has defined domestic violence. The next slide, please. Madam, next slide.
Yes, ma'am, it's hanging. Just a second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So remember, it is causing any harm or injury to the physical and mental health of the woman. So you know that every woman that is coming, who is coming to you, is definitely there is harm and injury which has caused harm to her physical and mental health. Or it is also compromising her life and safety or even threat. We have burn cases, we have cases of suicidal tendencies. All these cases is compromising with her health, life and safety. So that we really need to take into account. Women are also reporting that they are being harassed for dowry. I think the first law of our country for women, which came into existence post-independence, was Dowry Prohibition Act of 1961. Even today, we are seeing cases of dowry harassment and dowry deaths. It's very unfortunate. And this is the reason, when burn cases are coming to us, for whatever reason, either she herself has tried to commit suicide or she's been burned to death, we have to really take cognizance of these cases and report these matters. Forms of abuse. The law has recognized 4 forms of domestic violence, mainly the physical abuse, which is causing bodily injury or hurt, and it includes assault, criminal. These are all legal terms, but let us understand, to make it very simple, any bodily injury or hurt. Okay, and that is physical abuse upon women. What is economic abuse? The law also recognizes economic abuse. Most women do not want to complain against their husband because she's economically dependent on her husband. Even if she's economically independent, maybe she has no control over the finances. Everything is under her control, under the control of the house is not in her name. She has nothing to feel secure about. And this is one reason women are not reporting violence. What is economic abuse? It may include deprivation of basic economic, especially the BMC hospitals that we worked with. We saw women coming from a very downtrodden families, so they are deprived of basic basic needs, like food, shelter, is something that they are being deprived of. Financial necessities of life and entertainments. Most women are also being deprived of their Sridhan, of their documents, important documents. So all this can come under economic abuse. It also means, economic abuse may also mean that she's not allowed to even go to given medical expenses. Husband is not providing her for medical expenses, or even if she has have we even really, because most of you must be working in private hospitals, most women who are abused are not able to go to work for a few days or few months because they don't want to show their bruises to the society, and it may lead to loss of income. This is also economic abuse. Verbal and emotional abuse, very difficult to even identify, even to talk about. But yes, have we ever really ever thought the kind of abuse that women are facing at home? She's the first person to get up in the morning and the last person to sleep in the evening. And every day, practically every day, this verbal or emotional abuse that she's facing in the house. You are good for nothing, you don't know anything, you are not a good cook, you cannot even handle children. So what we have seen is, anything good that happens in the family, generally it is a male member in the family who takes the credit. But if anything bad that happens in the family, then it is a woman who has been blamed for it. So constant insult, constant ridiculing, threat, causing harm and injury to her mental health. So we have to take this very seriously. Most women in the psychiatric department reporting, you will see all the reports are normal. Even then she's complaining of headache, complaining of stomach ache. What is this? This is basically the psychosomatic problem, the psychological problem that she's facing at home. Sexual abuse. Now we are talking about domestic violence. And sexual abuse is something, unfortunately, marital rape is not recognized in our country. And but sexual abuse, are women, especially living in their homes, facing sexual abuse by their husbands, that we really have to encounter, that we really need to see. Any humiliating, he may bring her and another woman and have sex with her in the same house. He may even not allowing her to take decision when it comes to conception. All this is, forcing her every day without her consent, forcing her into having relationship. All this is sexual relationship in married life. And the law protects women from physical violence, from economic violence, from verbal violence, and also the last but not the least, the sexual violence. So these are the four violence that we talk to. Even any threat to the woman, that I will kill you, or I will beat the children, or I will even try to kill your parents. Any threat of this kind is also domestic violence. Dowry harassment is also domestic violence. So you will see that what the law had actually tried to make us all understand is, it is a global phenomenon. It is just not domestic violence is only happening in India, but it is a global phenomenon. And what we have to see, and it is, we have already seen, 1 in 3 women is facing violence, physical or sexual violence. That is our NFHS study report. Some of the important, let us understand who is the aggrieved person. Every woman who is living in a domestic relationship with the respondent, every woman and children. Now, interestingly, the law takes care of girls and boys only till the age of 18 years. So any children till the 18 years are protected under this Domestic Violence Act. But a woman of any age, of any relationship, is protected under this act. Who is a respondent in this under this act, against whom she can complain? Any adult male member. It can be her husband, it can be her live-in partner, it can be her brother-in-law, it can be her father-in-law, or relatives of the husband or the partner. These are the male members whom she can file complaint. And relatives also include female members of the husband and the partner. So respondent is a big number again. Domestic relationship. Please understand 4 concepts in understanding domestic relationship. This is what I really appeal to you all, especially when in the first instance, that this is a case of domestic violence. When you're doing probing, when you're doing screening, women don't report, they don't report domestic violence. And the kind of OPD papers that we have seen that she's been abused, she had she's been, there is a knife cut, there are bruises over her body, and it is written assault by an unknown person. Now, this is we really need to take care. If she's reporting, and this happens only when you build that kind of a rapport with her, you will have to build in that confidentiality in her, so that she reveals that who has abused her. You have to take, so domestic relationship means what? Any relationship, whether it is built through marriage or relationship in the nature of marriage. That is, it may be bigamous marriage, it can be fraudulent marriage, or it can be even live-in relationship. Consanguinity. This is the third category. Consanguinity means blood relation. So, like for instance, father and daughter, mother and son, brother, sister. These are all relationship of blood, consanguinity. And adoption. Any relationship which is built after adoption. And family members who are living together as a joint family. So, all uncles, aunts who are being abusive can also be part of domestic relationship. Shared household. Please understand, shared household, it is very important, most essential to even categorize a case of domestic violence. We have to, we really need to have these 5 components. That is, the aggrieved person and respondent need to be in a domestic relationship, either through marriage or relationship in the nature of marriage, consanguinity or adoption. Okay, they need to be in domestic relationship. Hello? Yeah. And shared household. Shared household means where the house that she is living in. It may be her maternal home, it may be her matrimonial home. It is not necessary that it is her ownership flat. The ownership of the household is irrelevant. It may be the house of the mother-in-law, it may be the house of the father-in-law, it may be the house of the father. So in whose name the house stands does not matter. As long as both the aggrieved person and the respondent live in that house, becomes a shared household. So these are the 5 components that we all really need to understand: is aggrieved person, respondent, domestic relationship, shared household, and domestic violence, the definition of domestic violence. Can I have the next slide? Yeah. So what are the rights of women? Please, at least you give her this information that she has a right to live in a home free from violence. It is her right. She cannot be blamed for any violence that has taken place. And it is a right to live in a, so zero tolerance to violence that we say. Even if she recognizes that, she will at least voice it out. She will at least talk about it to someone. You know, she has a right to live in a shared household. No woman can be, hello, no woman in a domestic relationship have the right to, every woman has a right to reside in the shared household, whether or not she has right, title, or beneficial interest. Even if her husband doesn't have any right to live in that house because it's a joint family, as long as the husband has a right, title, or beneficial interest of that shared household, by default she gets the right to live in that house, okay, because she is married to him. Fourthly, most important, no woman can be evicted or excluded from the shared household. So even if a woman is complaining against her mother-in-law or against her sister-in-law, they cannot be evicted from the house unless there is a court order. Unless there is a court order. So this law protects every woman in the house, that we have to take note of. And of course, right to seek remedies. What are the remedies that she can seek under this act? So these are the 5 remedies that she can seek. Protection order, as I said, no violence. So this woman, protection order will give her protection from any form of violence. It will also mean that the husband, the violator or the respondent cannot even visit her workplace, cannot even visit the school if he's threatening children, or through his wife. It may also mean, not even taking hold of her bank account, protecting her from all the instances where she can likely to be abused, both economically and even socially, and even verbally for that matter. So wherever she needs protection, even her Sridhan can be protected. Husband can also be restrained from operating her joint account, also selling of her important Sridhan, her articles, that can be also, she can seek protection against all these forms of violence. Residence order, the most important order which the law has given, especially the protection order and the residence order. This is such a beautiful law which protects the woman in whatever status she is in. Can we really imagine a woman leaving her matrimonial home and coming and staying with her? It is not easy for her. She has basically taken a stock of taking control of, taking her children away. The school has to be shifted. For her workplace may not be close by. All this adjustment that she has to do, a woman wants to reside in the same place minus the violence that this residence order can actually give her. Residence order will mean that the woman cannot be thrown out of her matrimonial, the home, the shared household that she is living in. She will be also restrained if the husband or the any partner is being abusive. She can also get a restraining order by not allowing the husband to enter the house. Such a restraining order. Even if there is a fear that the husband may sell the house, she can also take a restraining order that nobody should dispossess her, and she should be allowed to live in peace in that house. So these are the orders that she can get. Monetary relief. Even if she's working or not working, she is still entitled to get monetary relief. If she's living a certain standard of living, in order to maintain that standard of living, if there is a difference, a vast difference between the income of the husband and wife, she is entitled to get monetary relief under this act. Her monetary relief will include her day-to-day expenses. If she is not working, her day-to-day expenses will mean anything from grocery to milk to paper to transport. Everything will come under monetary relief. School fees, all this will come. Even medical expenses will come in monetary relief. Temporary custody order. Most women fear to leave their children in the abusive homes, especially if she has decided to leave the house and stay with her parents or anywhere else. She wants to immediately take custody of her children. So the law gives temporary custody to the mother, or especially the court generally takes into account the welfare of the child or is of paramount importance, and this is taken into account while giving temporary custody of children to the mother. So these are the reliefs which she can get immediately. The cases that I have seen, we have sought protection order and residence order on the day we have filed the case in the court. So these are immediate orders that a woman can get in the court. Monetary relief will make an assessment of the income of the husband, and accordingly monetary relief is given. Also, the standard of living is being assessed by the protection officer. All this has been done, and accordingly monetary relief is. Temporary custody, how small the child is and the child cannot be living with the mother, in such cases the temporary custody orders are also given on the day the cases are filed. So these are few reliefs that a woman. Most important is a compensation order. First time the law recognized that owing to the violence, the domestic violence that a woman is facing, the impact it has on her physical and mental health. I mean, especially I have seen cases in FMW, the female medical wards. I have seen cases where because of the abuse, her hand is broken, her leg is broken, she has lost vision, there is a loss of hearing. We have seen these kind of cases. Now, these are some temporary or permanent loss to her to the bodily because of bodily injury, and also because of this bodily injury, it is also impacting her mental health. She is not able to work, be it at home or even at a workplace. She is not able to perform. So she can be compensated for all the physical and mental harm that is being done to her. The law recognizes that woman needs to be compensated for the injury and that is caused by the family member. So these are the 5 orders that women can get under this act. And this, my honest request to all of you, please, if you know that this is a case of domestic violence, refer her to these agencies. If you are not able to, Anuja has so beautifully presented, that because you are the first point of contact for any woman. A woman may be hesitate to go to the police stations, for complaining against her husband. But hospitals, we feel, is a safe place for women to come and report about domestic violence, because nobody will question her, where she had been. Nobody will question her that, and because hospital may take if she's not well, she has gone to take treatment. But you have to take utmost caution, if at all the woman is coming to you where reporting, injuries or abuse, then see to it that you get to talk to her all alone in privacy, and build that build that rapport with her, and build that confidentiality in her, which is most important. See to it, if the abuser is accompanying with her, she will not be able to reveal the facts of the violence, the facts of the incident. So see to it, and you have the authority. See, this is what the law has recognized over the period, that you have the authority. If you are suspecting that the abuser is accompanying the woman, then you have the authority to tell her that I need to talk to this woman all alone. You are requested to please stand out outside the OPD. So you can maintain this kind of confidentiality in her, and say and really help her in referral. These are the agencies through whom the law can be implemented. The protection officers, every state has protection officers now. They are government officers appointed by the state government, and they act as a liaison between the woman who has been abused and the court. So they are the one who will take the woman to the court. They will fill the DIR, like how in the police station we fill the FIR if there is a criminal case. Similarly, in domestic violence cases, we have DIR, that is Domestic Incident Report, which is a civil form of violence, record of violence we call it. And so the protection officers are authorized to fill the DIR, and they will take the matter to the court. In most states, it is the independent cadre of protection officers. Over these 13 years, the law is in place for 13 years now. So we have seen that in most places, it is the independent cadre of protection officers who are already been appointed. And in some places, it is a women and child development officers who are appointed as, who are holding additional charge of protection officers. So if you are not aware who are the protection officers, please approach the Women and Child Development Department and find out the protection officers of your state. Service providers. First time the law recognized the role of non-government organizations, that is the NGOs. And because the NGOs is again, no woman would want to go to the police or court first. They may want to go to the NGO for counseling. And so the law recognized the role of NGOs, the service providers, and they are to be notified under the Act. Every service providers, if they have notified under PWDVA, then only they will be able to provide services under this Act, especially counseling, legal aid, psychosocial support, even for that matter, taking her to the court. All these kind of services, some income generation programs for this woman, rehabilitation program. This is the role of the service providers and who can really help the woman in seeking rehabilitation in the long run. The law recognizes the role of shelter home and medical facilities. They have to be notified. Ma'am, please the previous slide. No, the previous slide, yeah. So even the medical facilities.
To wind, because sorry, 12:15. Can you try to wind up?
Yeah, I will wind up. I will finish this as early as possible. Even the medical facilities have been recognized under this Act, and they have to provide services. Counselors, welfare experts, police, and legal services authorities. These are the agencies through whom the law can be implemented. Can I have the next slide? Next slide. Yeah. So what is your legal mandate under the Domestic Violence Act? Is you have to be, ma'am, the previous slide, sorry. No, the previous slide, ma'am. The previous, yeah. Just this, no, next. Next. Yeah. So you have to provide, most hospitals have to provide 24 hours shelter to the woman. Ma'am, sorry, the previous slide, please.
Can you tell me the slide number, ma'am? Because I've been doing it.
Okay, the previous slide, the slide before this. No, this is your.
This one, legal mandate?
No, not the, yeah, the legal mandate. Yeah, this. Anuja has already covered this, but just to tell you to the last two bullets, this is your mandate under the Act. You have to provide treatment to the survivor of domestic violence and you have to provide medical examination report free of cost. Okay. You have to also, the law also mandates you, along with protection officer, you also have a mandate to fill the domestic incident report, which till date, 13 years of my experience with this law, we have seen that the law, the medical facility are still not filling the medical incident report. But what you can do it, at least refer her to the protection officer who will do the needful for the survivor of domestic violence. Next. Now I will take you through the sexual violence. We have POCSO Act. You all must be aware of this. POCSO, madam, the previous slide. POCSO is Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act. We got this act in November 2012. It protects women. It protects women from children from sexual violence till they're 18 years. Who is the perpetrator? Any person who can be a child or an adult who commits sexual offense. The law presumes, especially in cases of children, when they're facing penetrative or non-penetrative sexual assault, it will be presumed that they have committed the crime, and the culpable mental state of the accused is also will be taken into account. Next. I'll just take 5 minutes. Child sexual abuse, mostly the children are not reporting that they have been sexual because they are not even aware. But as we have been saying, this is Ministry of Health and Family Welfare guidelines, which says that the children may be complaining of pain or urination, burning micturition, abdominal pain, inability to sleep. These are some of the symptoms shown by children who are facing sexual abuse. So if at all the parent or the child is not reporting, but if they are showing these kind of symptoms, then please see to it that these are potential cases of sexual violence and you have to accordingly take cognizance of the same. Next. Yeah. We also have Ministry of Women and Child Development guidelines, which have also said that children are reporting, especially girls, vaginal discharge, abdominal pain, enlarged hymenal ring. All this is there. So these are suspected cases of child sexual abuse. Next. We can stop here and take questions maybe if you want me to stop.
I think you should sum up, ma'am. We can't in between. You can just sum up the last like 3 slides. Yeah.
So the POCSO Act has recognized 7 forms of violence: the penetrative and the non-penetrative sexual assault. I just want to say, what is penetrative sexual assault? It is beyond, now it is just not penovaginal penetration, but it also says it is beyond penovaginal penetration. So any penetration into the 4 orifices of a child. It can be the pen. It can be your vagina, your anal region, your urethra, or it can be even mouth. So any penetration into these 4 orifices of a child's body is penetrative sexual assault. If committed by person of trust or person of authority, then it is aggravated, which has higher punishment. Then sexual assault, this is a non-penetrative, where it is just physical touch with sexual intention. So then we have sexual harassment, when somebody is stalking, somebody is following you, exhibiting nude, exhibiting the genitals. All this is sexual harassment using child for pornographic purposes, abetment and attempt. So these are the 7 offenses which the law has defined. Next. These are the stakeholders under the Act. So you are also there. You have been, the law has already given procedure, the procedures have been laid down in the law for how to conduct medical examination, and also the evidence collection and on the deposition in the court. So there is a mandate given in the Act itself. Next. Next. Anuja has already covered this. I will not get into the details of this, but yes, medical examination in cases of, also as I said, when you're seeing POCSO cases, even the IPC, the Indian Penal Code, and also the CRPC will apply. Please remember, it is just not only the government hospitals, even the private hospitals will have to provide free and immediate first aid and medical treatment in rape and acid attack cases. So now you have a mandate, even private hospitals have a mandate to engage with these cases. You have a duty to inform police. So even if the woman or the child says that we don't want to inform the police, but you have a mandatory legal obligation to inform the police if any rape or sexual assault cases reported to you. Rule 5 of POCSO says that you have to provide treatment for injuries, STDs, HIV pregnancy, all the PPEs that you have to take care, contraception, psychological counseling. So this is a part of the law which has come from 2012. You will see, especially in sexual violence cases, we have seen that it has shifted from evidence-based to treatment-based. Now the focus is on the treatment, on injuries and psychosocial support. So this is what we really need to take into account. I have covered this. You have to provide treatment free of cost. Please remember, the law also says, especially IPC 166B will apply to you if you're not providing treatment and if you're not examining the patient. Unless examination, you will not be able to provide treatment. You can be also liable for punishment under section 166B of IPC. So this is a new provision in place. What is your, you have to take informed consent for medical examination, collection of evidence. You have to inform police for purpose of investigation. You have to provide treatment. All this informed consent, you have to give her, you have to explain her the procedure. Seek her informed consent, and unless she signs the consent form, you will not be able to even touch her body. Anuja has already talked about it. You have to recognize that violence against women has health consequences. You are the first point of contact for the woman. Please refer to your MOHF HFW guidelines, which Anuja showed in one of her slides, and which will give you, actually really help you to how to assist doctors in conducting examination and providing psychosocial support to the child or the woman who is coming to you with sexual violence and also domestic violence cases. A lot of emphasis is laid on documentation. And you have to provide reasoned opinion. You cannot wait for forensic final FLS report, but you have to provide your reasoned opinion. Even the rape law has changed after the Nirbhaya. So it also says penetration. Though POCSO is gender neutral law, but IPC has rape law is still gender specific. That is, only women can file a case of rape against the perpetrator is gender neutral in this case. So same, the definition is same as penetrative sexual assault. The rape definition is also the same. Negative medical evidence, as pointed out, negative medical evidence means most women are not reporting immediately after the assault, or even the children for that matter. Negative medical evidence does not mean that rape or sexual assault has not occurred. It may, you have to take into account the time of incident and the time of report, and the time of activities that the child or the woman has undergone before reporting. So this, and medical evidence has to be collected only if if it is reported within 96 hours. Your comprehensive care will include informed consent and documentation. You have to take care of physical and surgical needs. You have to provide emergency contraceptive. Please, follow up of these cases is most important, because we have seen the first aid, the first hand treatment is given, and then after a few months, the woman is coming back and saying that she's pregnant. So this can be lapse on the part of the medical facility for not providing medical emergency contraceptive. And if she becomes pregnant because of rape, then for non-treatment, you can come in trouble. So you have to provide care for STD and rehabilitation, and as I said, follow up for delayed injuries and STD. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a lot of question answers. So I request panelists to please start the video.
I think my video is stopped at your end. I'm not able to.
Yeah. No, I have not stopped anybody. People have to start their videos. So we do thanks a lot. It was excellent. I mean, you need more time to explain all this about the acts and laws.
Yeah.
But because of the time constraint, we are not able to take up so much in detail. I think we would like to have some more on this session. We'll have 1 or 2 more sessions on it. Then only it can be understood, because it's quite difficult to understand each section and laws and acts, where and all, how to approach. Because I think apart from this evidences, there are called harassments also. I think we need to address those harassment issues also later on.
Of course.
So we have a lot of questions. I don't know whether you would like to take up now. We're 136 questions over here.
I have written down a few questions that came in the chat box, and if you say we could quickly answer some of them.
Please go ahead, Dr. Anuja.
The first question that I saw was that, is it important to report to the police, and what happens if a woman does not report to the police? Should medical treatment be given? Very clearly, we would like to mention that there is no need for a police requisition or a government or a court order to treat a woman survivor of violence. If a woman does not want to report to the police, medical treatment should still be given. You know, she should not be denied medical treatment. Like I mentioned earlier, Ujjwala mentioned, in cases of sexual violence, there is a section 357C of CRPC and 5 of POCSO, which makes it compulsory to provide medical treatment to all survivors. The next question that came up was, what happens if a survivor does not?
Yeah. Anuja, I will just add to what you said, So if the woman, you may give her treatment, but if she says that she doesn't want to inform the police, here I think you have to come out very clearly and tell her that you have a legal mandate to inform the police. Absolutely. And if the woman, and then the police can, the woman can inform the police that she doesn't want to file an FIR, or it is her call completely what she's reporting to the police. But you have to be very legally, you have to take a stance that it is your legal mandate to inform the police. I think please, that is why I am requesting you to please read the protocol. You have a consent form there, and the consent form very clearly tells you about the informed consent, and even you can document informed refusal. That also you can do.
This is in cases of sexual violence.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is in cases of sexual violence. There is a legal mandate for the health providers to report to the police. The woman survivor may not want an FIR. You can document, informed refusal. But what you need to do is file a medical legal case, definitely. A medical legal case has to be filed. The second question, and please Ujjwala keep adding, if a woman does not want to talk to the nurse in spite of the nurse asking repeatedly, I think you should try and probe, ask discreet questions, give her enough and sufficient space to talk. If she still does not want to talk, you should explain to her what are the impact of violence on the health of the woman, on the health of her child, and try and fix an appointment for a later date so that she can come and talk to the a health provider.
Here you can also, just to add, Anija, you can also, in case of domestic violence cases, you can also, these are some of the information that you really need to keep handy, especially list of protection officers, list of service providers. She may not want to open out to you, but she may, once she goes back home, she may want to go to these officers and seek their help, So at least this referral, this information can be given to the woman.
The other question was, what is coercion? So coercion is using force with somebody. So that was a question. I'm just going to the next question, Ujjwala. Are only women at risk of violence? So we want to say, well, no, men and women both are at risk of violence, but the incidents of violence are much higher amongst women. And if you look at child sexual abuse, the survivors, the victims can be both boys and girls. Ujjwala, do you want to add something here?
No, it's fine. Fine.
Okay. There was a question, does intimate partner violence lead to low birth weight babies? Yes, it does lead to low birth weight babies. Almost 16% of women facing intimate partner violence who are pregnant may have low birth weight babies. This is a WHO figure that has been given. There was a question on what is non-fatal consequences. Basically, I would like to inform the group that non-fatal consequences are, the impact that violence has on the physical health, the mental or psychological health of an individual, the reproductive health of an individual, that do not lead to death. Fatal consequences are those that lead to death. So non-fatal consequences could be in the nature of wounds, bruises, strangulation marks, anxiety, depression, etc.
And this is the time you have to actually intervene. If you are able to make intervention in non-fatal interventions, if you are able to make, I'm sure women will build that confidence, and and she will definitely have some coping mechanisms with her to deal with the violence that she's facing.
The next question is, in case of
it's 12:30. I think we'll have something from the panelists for the takeaways from today, and we'll share this question answers, because we are we want to make it as an frequently asked questions on these. So we'll share this question answers with you, so that whatever is required for our nurses can be answered, and we'll place it on our INC website. So over to the President INC, if you want to make any remarks, sir.
I think it was I felt it's a very good presentation and very timely, and I think especially when they are going to teach our A&M school teachers, especially the MSc Public Health Nursing, MSc OBG, and MSc Pediatric people, I think definitely this whole today's session is going to be very useful, and also for the GNMs where they are teaching the community health nursing. So I think as a policy, we are going to make this as we'll make it as a YouTube placing it, and also a lot of questions which has been asked due to the time constraints we are not able to answer. We'll bring it out as a FAQ, and we'll be placing in our INC website so that the people can access to those questions which they have asked. And also we'll be making this webinar is also we are going to make as the continuing education online this thing, so that they will be able to, by going through, they can get credit also. This will be a incentive will be provided to all the nursing professionals. So I think thank you very much for sharing this, and a lot of technical and also latest legal interpretations you have brought in today's presentation. That is very good. Excellent. Okay, please go ahead, Bharti.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Kirti, would you like to say something on it?
Yeah, very briefly, I think it was a very useful topic, and especially from the perspective of the nurses, it is very helpful because sometimes they are the only interface between a woman who has suffered any domestic violence and the rest, like how they can guide the woman to the appropriate system, whether it's police or a counselor or a NGO, wherever. So I would say, and also the other point is that many nurses who are especially female nurses are also among the same women, 20 to 30% who do suffer from domestic violence. And sometimes they themselves don't know what to do, whom to approach. And this is, I think, something very useful for nurses to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Vimla, I would like to share some of your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Bharti, for facilitating the session. It was very useful. I found the question answers in the chat box. There were so many things which the participants had queries on, and I'm hopeful that the FAQ will be able to address those questions. Thank you so much.
Okay. Dr. Punita, would you like to say something, some takeaway from today's session?
I just want to add one point that in our revised syllabus for the BSc Nursing, we are adding a course on Introduction to Forensic Nursing, and I'm sure some of these aspects that we have discussed are going to be incorporated into that particular course, and I'm sure our nurses will take a lot of subject content, and this will be an initial kind of a push for all of them to know that this is so important for all nurses to have the knowledge and also to be participating in this subject. Thank you.
Punita, good you reminded forensic nursing. See, we have a specialization in our curriculum. We have I don't know how many people are aware,
Yes.
Gujarat is having a forensic university. I don't know how many people are aware. And in that, we started a course called for the nurses, post-basic diploma of 1-year course, forensic nursing. And this, the request came from the forensic university. Now that course, we have converted into MSc forensic nursing. So this itself shows that all the development which is already going, and they have the university and the technical experts in that university, they felt that nurses are the important for evidence, and also they will be the first point of contact many times before the physician. The nurse might be there so that she should know how to, though we teach in our BSc and MSc, but not to that extent. But now nursing is also getting into the level of the specialization in forensic nursing. So I think this input of today's webinar is going to be useful for the, I think we should share with the Bharti, we should tell this that MSc nursing, what we have syllabus which is being implemented in university, we should inform this this development to them so that they can incorporate it in their in the curriculum, and also they can use this as a reference material. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Oh, Madam Sarvajit, Ma'am, Secretary, Madam, would you like to say something of today's?
I think it was very, very informative. Advocate Ujjwala and Mrs. Anuja both have widened the horizons of the nurses, because being in the clinical setting or while providing care in the home setting, nurses, they are in a unique position to identify, and they can use this knowledge that we have gathered today to recognize and to refer the caregivers as well as the victims to the proper source of help and support. So it was very educative. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Bright and Abra, would you like to say something on it?
Yes, it was a very informative and comprehensive session. Usually, rarely we are getting such an informative session, especially about the gender-based violence. And since majority of the time, the nurses are the first line contact with the women, so it is highly important for the timely recognition, because we already discussed that there are many of the times the women, they did not tell that they underwent such a situation. So it is very important to identify and also provide support. And also, I just want to add what Dr. Punita has told. Similarly, for our revised NBM curriculum, in that also we have a detailed session on the gender-based violence. So thank you.
I just want to thank Ujwala ma'am and Anuja ma'am for the clear presentation. It's actually an added information to all our nurses, and our faculty would have really liked this presentation of today, and they'll be able to teach more students in the future also. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
I know. Thank you very much, Dr. Anuja and Dr. Ujwala. It was a great presentation. I mean, a lot of learning in this, and a lot more to be done. It looks like that. So I think Sir President, sir, we would like to have more of. I think we should have 2 or 3 sessions on it, because it will detail out much more on the gender-based violence. I think we need to know more about being a nurse.
Bharti will write a letter to the all PG institutions. At least this we can share this information, because I definitely MSc OBG, MSc Community Health Nursing, and MSc Pediatric Nursing people need to be told. So the faculty need to be capacity building is required for the faculty itself. So we should communicate this information to post-graduate institutions.
So we'll do as director.
Can I say something?
And yes, ma'am. You want to say something?
Sorry to intervene. Since you were looking at compiling a frequently asked questions set, I would like to inform you that UNFPA has already compiled a set of frequently asked questions for, and this is obviously not specifically for violence, but for sexual violence. And we can share the link of this book, and it's a complete set of documents for health professionals. So it can be used both by nursing staff and doctors on addressing the issue of sexual assault and violence. So we'll share the links on that with you.
Sure, thank you, ma'am. And I think it was a
No, I think Bharti, before you conclude, I just want to answer that intervention. See, all the questions which our participants have asked, we should answer those questions. That is decide that should be our first priority. We will be sharing those questions to both of you. So please try to answer those questions, so that we'll be incorporating in our INC website. And the other one, if you have a soft copy, please share it with us. We'll see if there is a need to be shared. That also we'll take a decision whether it can be uploaded in our INC website. But at least today's whatever the questions they have asked, I think we should bring it out as a frequently asked questions for today's webinar.
Thank you very much. And I'm really thankful to the audience and the participants who are joining us in the huge numbers, and also taking away the good messages. Thank you very much. Namaste. Please see, I think most probably we'll have some more webinar, and we are also planning to do something on the 12th of May. So please join us on 12th of May. Thank you very much. Take care. Be safe. Bye.